My name is Maniza Naqvi, and this is the 28th episode of the Little Book Company podcast. The 28th episode is devoted in its 7 parts to Razia Bhatti and Newsline. In Pakistan's politically turbulent and troubled and oppressive 1980s, when a dictator ruled through 11 years of fear and silencing, a group of journalists and editors, mainly women, courageously published investigative journalism at the monthly Herald Magazine in Karachi. And then, in July 1988, they walked out of there with their editor-in-chief, Razia Bhatti, to set up a journalist-owned and run news magazine called Newsline. Why did they do that? And what did they have to lose or gain? When I reached out for conversations about Razia Bhatti to those who had walked out with her that day in 1988 or joined her soon after, they responded almost immediately and agreed to this podcast. Listen to what they have to say. They are Umber Khairi, Hassan Mushtaba, Saira Irshad, Tahmina Ahmed, Zahid Hussain, Samina Ibrahim, and Muhammad Hanif. As a reader of Newsline, I will read to you now Razia Bhatti's editorial from the inaugural issue of Newsline, published in July 1989. The editorial was titled, Why Newsline? "42 years down the road from independence, this nation seems to have bartered away the promise of its birth. To a whole generation of Pakistanis, fear, violence, authoritarianism, and deceit represent the norm, for they have known no other. The press in Pakistan shares the guilt of this nation's state. It has been silent when it should have spoken, dishonest when it should have been forthright, succumbed when it should have stood fast. Yet, like this nation, the press retains the strength to rise above its weakness. Cynicism and idealism are inextricably linked in the journalist's trade. We can see the reality, yet refuse to abandon hope. This is the spirit that has produced Newsline. This magazine was born of the commitment of a team of journalists to the truth, and this is the commitment that will color its pages. Newsline is the venture of a team of working journalists who want to serve this nation in the way they know best, to seek the truth, to spotlight injustice, and to fight for redressal. We hope not only to appeal to the reason, but to touch the heart. In this endeavor to reflect the reality of this nation, we look for support from our readers. For it is not the press alone that has a stake in press freedom. In the final analysis, a free press is both a nation's defense against authoritarianism and a government's defense against complacence. This government has made a public commitment to freedom of thought and expression. That commitment will be tested by its tolerance of dissent. We promise no miracles, but if somewhere along the road to this nation's destiny, the truth presented in these pages makes some difference, Newsline will not have been in vain. Razia Bhatti. Today, I'm in conversation with Umber Khairi. She's a journalist and is a former BBC broadcaster and producer, and one of the founding editors of Newsline. Welcome, Umber.
Hi, Maniza.
Hi. Umber, thank you so much for being so kind to just, I asked you about 20 minutes ago if you'd be willing to come on this podcast, and you said, yes, let's do it.
Let's do it.
And I have a feeling that you were so quick about it because I said we would talk about Razia Bhatti.
Absolutely. Great idea.
And this idea today came because Hassan Mushtaba wrote to me and said that, listen, I've been listening to your podcasts, and I think you should do a podcast on Razia Bhatti and Newsline because she was such an inspiration to so many. And I thought, yes, I absolutely should. And the person I thought of first was you, that I should start this off with a conversation with you.
I think I'm really glad you're doing it, Maniza, actually, because like Hassan Mushtaba said, Razia was a very important figure in journalism and also just inspired, a whole bunch of people, not just in journalism, but in academia and public life. And yeah, she left us too soon, but she has left behind a real legacy.
She left too soon, and should we begin there about how she passed away?
Well, it was February 1996, and we just got these shocking phone calls that she had passed away. And I think, from what I remember, it was a stroke, high blood pressure. I think she was 50 or 51 at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and her children were quite young, and it was a huge shock. It was a huge shock.
Was there, was it I heard there was it a brain hemorrhage, aneurysm?
I don't know the details.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know the details actually, Maniza.
Okay, well, that's really not important. The important part is that somebody so vital and so important and who was doing such great work and was beloved uh, by the people around her uh, and who had such a huge influence on so many uh, passed away and had such an untimely passing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And, I read the article that you wrote about her. And as you wrote that this was the third time that you've written about her since her passing. Uh, and 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 it was, I think, in relation to her memorial gathering this March.
No, so what happened is that a few years ago, I think it was about 6 years ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago, Nafisa Shah, who's a former staffer and is now in politics, she, talked to all of us and said, we should do something to pay tribute to Razia.
Mm-hmm.
And what she visualized actually, I think, was more of a function and sort of, with lectures and things like this. But when we discussed it, it evolved into a lasting tribute. So what came, and this was when we were just, trying to get this done, the article that I'd written, that we need a memorial
Mm-hmm.
to. So that article was written then when we were trying to find the right place and the right kind of memorial. And what we ended up with was a working relationship with the journalism school at IBA.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I mean, we thought about going to Karachi University. There was, where Razia herself had studied. But then we talked to the CEJ, the Center for Excellence in Journalism,
Mm-hmm.
and another person was in charge there who also, I think was an admirer of Razia. It was Kamal Siddiqui was in charge at that time. And so we kind of discussed things, and what we ended up with was a seminar room is named after her, and there's a plaque in her name there.
Mm-hmm.
We had an internship scheme so that students could be selected for an internship with Newsline,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a gold medal for the best a master's student for their journalistic work, for their thesis.
Wow, that's quite a wonderful tribute right there.
We also have what's ongoing is a annual memorial lecture series.
Mhm.
So we started off with Rahman Saab. We've had Rahimullah Yusufzai as speakers, Abbas Nasir, Bina Sarwar, and this year's speaker was Kathy Gannon, the AP war correspondent. So yeah, so that's the context of that article. And I'm very glad there is a memorial, at every graduation ceremony of the IBA. Her name is mentioned when the gold medal is awarded. The plaque is there, so younger generations know that she was a figure, and her photo is there. So it is a good tribute. I think it's within the profession, and it's a sort of an acknowledgement of what she stood for, because and it's the right place. I mean, it's the Center for Excellence in Journalism, and I think she really embodied excellence in journalism.
So let's talk about that. She tell me about her career. She began with Dawn.
She, as far as I know, yes, began. I don't know that much. She was much older than me, Maniza. But from what I know of her, like when I came across her, she was the editor of the Herald, and the Herald in the 1980s had been reinvented to a very stylish magazine.
By her.
Yeah, and before that, it was kind of, and before it became the Herald, it was the Illustrated Weekly, I think.
Mhm.
And that sort of evolved into this monthly magazine called the Herald.
Mhm.
And the Herald was very impressive at that time. You're talking about martial law years, really
Mhm.
difficult times. The last. Maniza, I'm sorry about this. I'm not sure how to turn off these notifications. Are you getting them?
No, don't worry about it.
Okay, you're getting this ringing sound?
Not at
No.
all. Mhm.
Okay, great. So it's not translating. So yeah, so in the 1980s, the Herald was a really impressive, hard-hitting political magazine. And this was, time of martial law. These are the last days of of Bhutto's government as well. So really tumultuous times. And this was an amazing team. It's kind of dream team that Razia had over there. There was Razia, there was Rehana Hakim, there was Samina Ibrahim, Saira Irshad. Then you had people like Talat Aslam, amazing, Amne Azam Ali, and Zahid Hussain. I mean, these were like, amazing bylines. They used to do joint stories, sometimes, reporting. And it was just very, very impressive.
I used to read it from cover to cover. And if it wasn't for, I mean, I relied on Amne Azam Ali's articles as my guide to understand Karachi. I was new to Karachi, and I got to know Karachi through her writings, how
Um,
Karachi worked.
Amini was another one who left too soon. She had cancer, and I mean, she died, I think, in sort of the early 90s, maybe. Yeah.
Mid-90s. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, she was excellent. She was really very good. And then we had these amazing other, people who wrote, Arif Hassan, Rahman Saab, just, it was just a very well put together.
Yeah.
Because these were people who wrote for other publications as well, but it wasn't the same thing. The way that Razia could put things together
Mm-hmm.
and her editorial expertise, that was the kind of, the magic ingredient.
Umber, I have a question here. When I think about the journalists the people who wrote for the Herald at that time, um, and then for the Newsline later, um, what was the quality? I mean, they were not just journalists, they were much more than that, each and every one of them. What was it about them, really, that stood out?
Um,
Mm-hmm.
well, there was the editorial team, and then there were the contributors. So the thing is, there were some just people who were excellent writers, who were excellent analysts, and then a lot of times the people with a social conscience and sort of political moorings in some way, progressive stances or whatever, and who were committed to this idea of the written word and journalism and all of this. And we had some excellent contributors, and I say they wrote for other publications, some of them as well, but they didn't shine as much or look as great as they did in Herald or Newsline. And I think part of that was because of the alchemy that Razia and her team were able to do in the production and the editing.
Speak more about the alchemy. I love the way you use that word, because yes, the long form of the articles in Herald or Newsline and the art that went along with them.
It really was an art, but also really hard work. And it should be hours and hours. And, there would be and that wasn't a cut paste kind of, computer thing, but marking on paper, paragraphs moved around, whole language sort of modified, improved. The whole thing was kind of redone sometimes. And, would just work really well then.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, paragraph by paragraph, point by point, no, we can move this up here. No, this is repetition. No, we need, it was painstaking. And she was really a perfectionist in that.
Are we talking about the Herald right now, or are we talking about Newsline?
We're talking about both because it was the same team.
Uh-huh.
So I'm talking basically about Razia and her team.
Mm-hmm. So when she moved from the Herald, she took her team, or the team went with her to set up Newsline.
So should I tell you this story then?
Oh, absolutely. Tell me the whole story.
Okay, so this is 1988, and this is General Ziaul Haq, who's a military dictator who ruled Pakistan for 11 years and took over after Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was deposed and was the man who was in power when Bhutto was hanged, and basically presided over this kind of 11 years of Islamization, etc., etc. He had a selected prime minister in place, Muhammad Khan Junejo, and Ziaul Haq himself had made himself president. So he was the president and he had a prime minister. Now, the prime minister started being like a political person and flexing his muscles in terms of, saying we should decide Afghan policy and various other things. Then a couple of things happened. There was, I think there was a lot of things Junejo was doing, Ziaul Haq was not very happy with. He was behaving like an actual prime minister as opposed to a puppet. So a few things happened in 1988. One was the Ojri camp. This was the depot for a lot of the ammunition that was going through Pakistan to Afghanistan. And there was an explosion there. It was all very mysterious. A lot of people died I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was just like one day people in Rawalpindi in Islamabad, they woke up, there was they thought the enemy had attacked. There were kind of bombs raining down and there was chaos. Anyway, there was this inquiry going on into what had happened and, what went wrong. And there were a lot of elements in the military and the intelligence who were against this investigation, and they did not want it to go ahead. And the government, that Junejo's government was going ahead with that. That was going on. And then in May, this is May, isn't it? So in May, what happened was that Junejo was unceremoniously dismissed by President Ziaul Haq. When he came back, it was really quite a strange kind of a scene. He flew back from a visit to the Far East, and he was supposed to have a presser at the airport. But while he was there, all the journalists started rushing out. And one of Junejo's ministers asked them, the prime minister is having a presser. Why are you leaving? They said, oh, we've been told there's a big story at President House and we have to go there. So when they got to President House, Ziaul Haq basically announced that the government has been dismissed. So he fired Junejo. And there were a lot of things going on. So then there was an interim government in place. So one of the things that happened during that time was the budget that was coming in, which was being passed by this caretaker government. We got a message from management in dawn, and Razia was told things like, you have to be supportive of the budget, which was, yeah. So, you often get things like this from management, and you sort of say, I think she sort of said, well, we'll analyze it and we'll look at it. But I think there were other things going on in that Herald was very outspoken, was, politically very kind of hard-hitting.
Mhm.
And I think the management had flack about this
Mhm.
from probably the military.
Hmm.
So it was probably building up. I don't know the management side of it. But at some point, I mean, I remember we were there in the office and they called her up and she came back and she said, they basically had this conversation and they said, well, maybe if you can't do this, maybe you should leave.
Hmm.
It was that sudden. But
Hmm.
what also going on at that time was that the Dawn Group they were trying to get a declaration to publish to have an edition of Dawn published from Lahore, as far as I remember, and that wasn't proceeding. That was kind of blocked,
Mhm.
and it was probably a business decision that okay, we can have a trade-off in a sense. Anyway, it was very sudden. We were very shocked. And then the people who were there at that time, some people were away. But after a while, a lot of people decided, not everybody at that time, because, not everybody could make that decision quickly, whatever. So a lot of people decided to also leave and protest.
Mhm.
And we did that. But then, of course, the shock was that, oh, well, suddenly you have no jobs. So, and
Elitism and practicality.
that was in, I actually didn't tell you one thing. As Ziaul Haq took over, the election was announced. And August 1988, the cover of the Herald was the text was Countdown to Confrontation.
Yep, and
And
17th.
it had a profile. Now, this is before the 17th. It had a profile of Ziaul Haq facing Benazir Bhutto.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the cover. And, I think there was some political posters and things like that in the background.
Mm-hmm.
So this was countdown because that was the story of the upcoming elections. This, after 11 years of this Ziaul Haq's rule, there's an election coming up. Benazir has come back to the country. Anyway, this cover in August was stopped at the press.
Huh.
They said, we cannot put Benazir on the cover. And overnight, they got the design unit to design another cover. So the cover was just some random political posters on the wall and graffiti.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that was the point at which they said, oh, we can't. Maybe you should leave to Razia after, I don't know, 20 plus years. Anyway, so that had happened. And then, of course, soon after that, General Ziaul Haq's plane crashed. So we don't know what would have happened if they hadn't asked her that, and perhaps he had gone before Dawn made this decision. Anyway, so that's all happened in August. Then I think we would meet up, but obviously, like I personally, I started doing freelancing for various other publications and things, but it was quite depressing in many ways. But Razia had this idea. She was like, okay, we can start a different magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And as luck would have it, it was before that, it had been really very difficult to get a publishing license, but it was called declaration. But the caretaker regime actually passed laws that made it easier to get a declaration. Previously to that, you had to, like, it was very difficult to get a publishing license. Also, paper was very difficult. You had to have quotas, and getting the paper for your publication was difficult. So all of these things sort of became easier. And we got the declaration, and we used to meet at each other's houses and plan out this new magazine. And what we decided was that
Meeting? Paint the scene for us. Who was meeting at houses? It was you, there was Razia, Saira Irshad.
Yeah, Rehana, Samina, Tehmina Ahmed.
So Samina Ibrahim, Rehana Hakim.
Yeah, Saira Irshad, Tehmina Ahmed.
Samina M.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was all women who were meeting? And
it was all women. I mean, Zahid Hussain joined later, basically just because before our first issue came out, after we'd kind of done all the dummies and we'd set up everything. So Zahid joined then.
But it was all women who were actually really in the forefront of saying, we're going to start this new magazine and we're unstoppable.
And it would be journalist owned. So we would have the same thing that had happened with the Dawn Group. And so, I mean, it was pretty idealistic, actually.
Yes, repeat that.
I mean, we weren't rich, we didn't have a lot of money, but we all invested in it. So we had shares. We wanted to be a majority journalist owned. And then we got some other investors in as well.
So can I ask you, so here you were, this idealism, a journalist-owned news magazine in which you were putting in your own amounts of investment. May I ask what the average investment was at that time by each of you?
I can't remember the details, but I mean, I think a couple of us put in 1 lakh, some people put in 3 lakhs, like that. So, yeah. So, I mean, at that time, it was a good sum of money. And then basically, we wanted to have the journalists own more than 50% of the shares, and the rest was put in by a few other people, somebody from advertising. And we made it clear that we couldn't have any interference, and they were on board with that.
And do you remember who your first advertisers were who came on board?
I don't remember, but I remember it was quite difficult because obviously Dawn was a big client. And it, for some people, it was like, well, we cannot, because what if they drop us? But I have to say that Samina was amazing. She, apart from being on the editorial panel, she also took over as the business manager. And she had great, was very good with people, had very good kind of, relationships and rapport. And she, was managed to bring in a lot of ads, but it was an uphill struggle. It was. And the Dawn Group was not happy with it at all, because obviously, they didn't want advertisers to support us.
So now here you are meeting in each other's homes, putting this thing together. And then what happens? Did you start working from one of your homes, or did you find?
So what happened was, I can't remember who it was. I think it was somebody who associated with the Metropolitan Hotel. I think might have been Happy Mindwala, might have been somebody else. But I think, again, it was Samina who said that somebody had offered to give us office space in the Metropole. Wow. And so we got a room in the Metropole Hotel in Karachi. One room with the bathroom. I think it was on the 3rd floor. We basically brought in the furniture from home. I brought in a desk and a couple of chairs. Samina brought in, something else. Razia brought in something. So, we brought in chairs and desks from home. We set up over there and started working there.
And
Yeah.
Did you have computers?
Not at that time. We later got the computer. We had typewriters at that time. We
Mhm.
later got, we were actually the first in Pakistan to have to use desktop publishing.
So this would have been 1988, September, October?
So the first, this was towards the end of the year and the beginning of 89. And basically our first issue was July 1989.
July 1989, you come out with your first issue. That would mean you were working on it all between January till July. You had been working on that,
Well,
1980.
yeah, I mean, we started in the winter, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we had the office by December or not, whether we got it in January. But I mean, when we basically, we had that for a little while, and then later we moved to a different office near Teen Talwar in Clifton,
So
which
now,
is,
in that period, January 89, Benazir has just been elected. She's been inaugurated. And so we're in the first 6 months of her government,
Mhm.
first time. And here you guys are setting up for your first issue that's coming out in July of 1989. What's the cover of your first issue?
So the cover of the first issue was Benazir, who you mentioned, Benazir Bhutto. She was elected uh, in the November 88 elections and then sworn in December as Prime Minister. And so this was kind of been about 6 months of her government. And we had an exclusive interview with her, which Razia and Zahid did together. And that is very interesting, actually, to read that in retrospect.
Mhm.
So yeah, so that was it. And it was a very good issue, actually, if you look at it. And I remember we organized a big launch at the Marriott Hotel
Mhm.
in Karachi. And I think it's, what is it, that big ballroom or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And, we invited advertisers and our contributors and journalists and everything. And I remember one person saying to me, it was like, oh, this is a really impressive magazine. It's a proper magazine. I'm thinking, but did you think we were coming up with a photocopied thing or cyclostyle? I don't know what they expected. But I think Dawn was a bit shocked
Yes, I
because
bet.
it was a very good quality magazine.
By that time, by the time the first issue came out, were you already at your offices at Teen Talwar or not yet? You were still coming out of Metropole?
Um, I can't remember, Maniza.
Think, Umber, try to remember. Were you in the Metropole Hotel?
I actually can't remember. I think we were in Teen Talwar, but I don't remember.
And so now this first interview with Benazir Bhutto goes into the interview goes into your first issue, and Zahid Hussain and Razia Bhatti go for it. Who set up that interview? Do you remember how you got that, and what was the feeling in the newsroom, so to speak?
No, I don't remember that.
Hmm. And okay, so the interview happens, and what else was in that issue?
There were quite a few things. I mean, do you want me to look at it for you now?
No, try to just recall it. That's okay. If you don't remember, that's all right.
I mean, we had created different sections. Like we had one section which was called Memories of Another Day.
Mm-hmm.
And that was looking back, either somebody looking back or going back to a period of history. That was very different.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of a historical recap of something or memories. And I think I'm not sure I think we might have had Rollo the photographer in the first issue. It's a very famous photographer of Lahore, taken these iconic portraits in his studio.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was different.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a couple of we had some color pages as well within the magazine that was kind of different as well. We had something called one page at the end, which was called End of the Line,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which was also different. It was just, funny things or odd things or bizarre things. And we had a lot of people who had come with us as contributors, despite, having the possibility of Dawn not wanting them to write for them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There were pieces by Rahman Saab, by M.B. Naqvi, all kinds of well-established journalists had made a point of contributing.
Mhm.
Zora Yusuf, I think Qazi Salahuddin had something, I'm not sure. But yeah, so.
Ramne Azam Ali also come with you guys? I don't seem to remember that. Or did she stay
No,
with
no, no, no. Amne had actually left before
Mhm.
Razia was asked to leave. Amne had left because Amne was moving on to work in development work. I think she was going to Gilgit. She went to Gilgit with the Aga Khan Foundation.
Yes, yes.
So she wasn't in Karachi and she wasn't in journalism.
Mhm. Okay. And then you had an art section to the paper and to the magazine as well.
Yeah, art, culture, fashion, that was all there.
Reviews.
Yeah, reviews, the kind of, the back of the book, the political section. Then we had the roundups, political roundups from the various provinces, and we found good people to do them, and that's actually how we found Rahimullah Yusufzai. I think he was with the Frontier Post at that time, and I think Aziz Siddiqui Saab actually said, well, why don't you try him? And then he was wonderful. I mean, he's one of another great figure in journalism, towering figure, I would say, in
Mhm.
Pakistan and
And-
in the region.
Right. And at that time, we didn't have Zoom calls and Skype or WhatsApp and the rest of it. So how did everybody communicate with, how did people's news articles come across? Did you have to mail them, fax them? How did all this
This
happen?
is the 20th century. I mean, we managed to do it. It's like on the phone a lot of the time. When
Mhm.
people send their articles, the typical thing would be by PIA, I think by cargo press matter.
Oh,
That would reach quite quickly, right? Otherwise, they'd deliver them if they were local. But
mhm.
otherwise, it was sort of PIA cargo, I think. They used to go press matter, que usse, and or printed material or something. And then soon after around the time we started this thing called the facsimile, the fax machine,
Mhm.
sort of came into being.
Mhm.
And so then people started faxing. So we started having faxes coming in then.
Right, because before that it was the telex. So now it was a fax machine.
Yeah, we didn't have the telex, and in our newsrooms had it, but we didn't have it in a monthly office. No.
Ah,
So, and I have to say that when we were at the Herald, basically it was galley printing, and
mhm.
basically, you'd have these galleys, typesetting, and then galleys, and then when you were correcting the final proofs, often you had to like use a blade and cut and paste things actually manually.
And so in this office in near Teen Talwar, um, it was in a house. Was it?
It was a flat. It was a Sandhaven Apartments. And this was originally, it was an office for, I think they were called Design Collective, Munira Amin and Qaisar. They were graphic designers.
Mhm.
And they were leaving the office, so we got that. And again, we brought in our, furniture and our bookshelves and tried to set it up.
How big was it?
It was quite small. I mean, there was one big room outside, and then it was small. Like we had one area where we where this.
Umber?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, go
So
ahead. So give me the layout.
it was a small office. It was on the ground floor, so it had its own entrance, and you'd come in, and we created a kind of a reception area, and then there was a place where all the staffers would sit.
Mhm.
And then there was a kind of corridor area where we had the computers for the typesetting and the layouts.
Mhm.
There was one room with a kind of a glass panel where Razia and Rehana had their office. The rest of us sat outside. And at the back, we had the business and the advertising and the circulation.
Did you have
it was a small layout, but there was enough room for all of us. And as I say, we got in Mac computers, and we were the first people to actually go and do, produce something on desktop publishing.
You have a kitchen there?
We had a kitchen, of course. Food was very important, food and tea.
Tea, I would imagine.
Yeah.
The tea was on, available, I'm sure, 24/7. What about, was it a smoke-filled room? Because I suppose everybody smoked, right?
No, we had 2 smokers. So, yeah.
One?
Sorry?
Razia would be one?
No, Razia wasn't a smoker.
Okay, so I'm just imagining all this. Okay, so you're smokers and the rest were not. And so smoke-filled to some extent. And
not really. But yeah, it was, it was just the sort of and it was a good atmosphere. It was a good.
So Umber, let's just stop here for take a pause, and then we'll come right back, okay?
Okay.
So Umber, you're talking about the great atmosphere there in the Newsline offices. Why was it that great an atmosphere, and what do you mean by that?
It was a great atmosphere because even though, like, you had people who were very experienced and very senior, it wasn't very hierarchical. And I think this was down to Razia being a very good leader. She was really able to consolidate a team and give them the feeling that they are a team and they are important, and never talk down to people. So that was one thing. And also there was this kind of family kind of feeling. People used to eat together, bring in food from home, organize food. She was very particular about birthdays, weddings, babies, things like that. So I think it was this, and she would encourage young people to go out and do things. So you would be told, oh, no, you don't know how to do that, or you're incompetent, or you don't have the experience. She would just say, well, you go and do this story. And so that it was a very encouraging and very supportive kind of an atmosphere. And you were encouraged to, I think when I joined the Herald in 1988, at that time, I remember, like Razia told me, well, the first commandment in the office is, thou shalt not bore. So you come up with boring or monotonous or, rubbish stuff.
I love that. Thou shalt not bore.
Yes. So it was, it was like, people would have ideas, they would be wanting to do things, they would be chasing after stuff. And in that first year, I'll tell you, we needed more people. So we recruited people like Muhammad Hanif, went on to become, a very senior person in the BBC, who went on to become a very successful novelist. And, he's one of the best writers of Pakistan, I think. So Hanif joined. And I think that Razia was able to recognize things in people, something about them, because at that time, Hanif didn't have that much experience. And he was quite, he was not very confident. But she could see there was something there. And then we recruited Nafisa Shah, who did some amazing articles on culture and, communities for us. And then she later went on to she got a scholarship to do her PhD at Oxford and in anthropology. But she did some very, very, very sensitive and very interesting work on a lot of different communities. And so, there were the people like that who they were able to sort of get a good team and build it up even further.
There was a big article in Newsline on Karo Kari. Am I saying that right?
Nafisa. That was Nafisa.
That was Nafisa.
That was Nafisa. Nafisa was the one who who brought the idea, who
Mhm.
brought the idea out and, uh, well, educated us really and had access to all the, and then she you know, worked on that same thing
Mhm.
for her PhD thesis eventually when she did finish it.
Mhm. And that would be a very courageous thing to do at that time, at any time actually.
It was.
Mhm. And Hassan Mustafa was there.
Hassan Mujtaba was there. Hassan Mujtaba did a lot of good work.
Mhm.
Uh, I I think Hassan Mujtaba came through maybe Hanif or some other contact,
Mhm.
and Hassan Mujtaba was based in Hyderabad.
Mhm.
So he did a lot of very brave reporting as well. And that
Mhm.
time when there was a very high incidence of these dacoities and dacoit gangs operating inside Sindh.
Mhm.
And it was quite a lot of abductions. I mean, they were kind of a rule of terror, a reign of terror in some areas in the Kacha and around them. So Hassan did a lot on that as well and political reporting.
Mhm. And what did Saira write about? Saira Irshad,
So I wrote about various things.
about art.
She wrote about art. She wrote about uh, you know, I suppose culture or personality interviews.
Mhm.
A
I.
variety. I
Mhm.
mean, people weren't really that pigeonholed.
Mhm.
Could kind of go across and do different sections and different sorts of interviews or different sorts of articles.
Right. And yourself?
I used to concentrate a lot on I mean, the memories of another day. I was very keen on that and books and culture and trends.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Mm. So, so let's go back to Razia Bhatti. So
Mhm.
she created this atmosphere in this office, and she had that same uh, sense at the Herald as well. That's why the team moves with her. She's a leader because she listens and she encourages and she, lets people go in their own direction. She's able to recognize special people. She's able to see something special in people and knows and can figure out that they have potential, and she cultivates their writing.
Yes, and cultivates their writing, basically improves their writing. Again, that alchemy process that I was saying. But also, she's able to inspire people because she's a woman of great integrity,
Mm-hmm.
but also huge professionalism.
Mm-hmm.
So, like in terms of journalism, she was kind of spot on. Her political sense was very good.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, just, you know, to be able to look at stories and assess them and uh, weigh up options, and she was very astute journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
And
so
can you tell me about her background? Do you know anything about her background, where she went to school, her family?
so I think you probably, if you ask Rihanna or somebody who's known her much longer,
Mm-hmm.
but she was a Karachiite. I think they used to her father perhaps was in the Navy or something like this. They lived on Monora.
Mm-hmm.
And she went to Karachi University, and she was very well respected at Karachi University as well. I think my mom was there at the same time. I know several people were at the same time, and she was very well respected there as well.
Was she part of the student politics on campus in the 70s?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not the right person to ask. I
Mhm.
don't think so.
So tell me something more about her. So paint a picture of her um, somehow as a just a person. Um, she was. You said she had great integrity, and she uh, she allowed other people to speak their mind in the office.
So I think Razia was one person, like her work spoke for her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she was extremely good at it and extremely successful.
Mm-hmm.
And very had a firm idea of what she wanted and what needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But she was alongside this, she was not like overbearing, domineering person. She was actually a very modest, soft-spoken person. And she was like about not very tall.
Really?
Yeah, she was about 5'1" or something like this.
Five
You know,
one? It's tiny.
she wasn't very tall,
Uh-huh.
uh, but she was just very sure of herself.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, there was a lot of respect for her. She was very good at maintaining relationships with people,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, yeah, she was just a great editor. It
Mm-hmm.
was a privilege to actually, be able to be associated with her, I would say. And I mean, it was her idea to start a magazine. And somehow, against all odds, we made it a reality. And I think it was largely because of her vision.
Mm-hmm.
It was very easy to get demoralized. It was very difficult. You went from working from a large news group,
Mm-hmm.
which had everything done for you. HR would do one thing, you know, the press, you had your own printing press, business, a different business section, a different design section. You went from that to basically running your own business
Mm-hmm.
and doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of, you're the editor, but you're also the kind of, have to look at finance, and you have to look at kitchen, and you have to find a printing press, and it was very difficult. You didn't have people to come and sort out things. You couldn't call somebody and say, come and fix this,
Mm-hmm.
send me that.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do everything.
Yeah. Did you have air conditioning?
We had air conditioning. I think we had two air conditioners.
Thank God. Uh, yeah, that and oh, I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, Amber. I'm trying to, think of Razia, and I'm kind of so envious. I wish that somehow I could have been a part of this. Um,
Well, if you were a reader, in a sense, you were part of it. I mean, before we actually came out with the first issue, all of us were trying to sell subscriptions to people.
mhm,
So, our families were trying to sell subscriptions, annual subscriptions.
mhm,
So if you were a reader, in some way, you were a part of it because you supported the whole venture. And I have to say, it was an incredibly difficult thing to do.
mhm,
And I think that was eventually impacted on her health as well, Razia's,
mhm,
and her blood pressure and things like this, because it was extremely stressful. Financially, it was very difficult. And we had these contributors who were basically just supporting us. They weren't paid for months, years, actually.
hmm.
And it didn't matter to them somehow.
No,
And
I
yeah,
can't imagine it would matter to them because writers want to write and be read.
I know, but there were a few people who said, well, we can't afford to do this. Like, for example, Ayaz Amir was one person who said, well, I'm not giving up. So, I mean, I think Razia was a bit hurt because um Ayaz had, I, I think, really, the Herald had really helped him to make his reputation. He used to write in Dawn as well. But yeah, so there were people who couldn't do that, couldn't make that commitment, but there were other people who were so supportive.
Mhm.
I think years later, when Rahman Saab uh, was sent his first check, he returned it. And I think he said something like, he wrote something like, when you make your first million, then you can send me my first check or something like this.
How wonderful is that?
There were people like that. So,
Yeah.
and they understood, and they just were excited to be part of the whole venture and proud, and they believed in Newsline and what it meant.
Mhm.
So, but it was very stressful, because we had the luxury at Herald of just concentrating on the editorial and the production. And over here, you had to, like, there were so many other headaches. Revenue hasn't come in, payments for ads haven't come in. How can you pay your contributors? Salaries were very low, often delayed.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, we had Kafil Saab, who was the printer, the
Mm.
printing press. I mean, they used to wait for payments, and it was very difficult. But they were very nice, but there was a limit to how we could do that.
Mhm.
So there were constant pressures. There were constant pressures.
But the biggest constant pressure was the freedom of speech. And I would imagine, to be able to have put out Herald or Newsline under the circumstances uh, was was a feat in itself, a challenge, especially the Herald during the time of Ziaul Haq um, under a military dictatorship, and the system wouldn't have changed dramatically uh, just because he went up in smoke, right? So the same tendencies were all there, even when Newsline started its work.
Yeah, we used to get threats sometimes, threats, things like that. Yeah.
Like what kind of threats?
Oh, why have you said this? We'll fix you, sending our chaps over, stuff like this.
Did any chaps come over?
No, no chaps came over.
Mm-hmm. They're scared of women, I guess. You went very silent.
Sorry?
Did you hear what I said? I said they were just scared of women.
Um, yeah, I mean, you had people who stood up in political rallies and said these women with their ideas and their short hair, and I don't know, there were things like this.
Yeah.
There, there was, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know if it was a deterrent or not a deterrent, but we did get threats, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
It's an incredibly courageous and amazing feat when I think, you look at Pakistan's context and you look at what was accomplished in the Herald and the Newsline, um, and you look at other countries where there's all sorts of resources and, the protection of the First Amendment, even though that's being stripped somehow and the mask is coming off of that pretense here in the West now with the issue of Palestine. But it was quite remarkable what was going on with the Newsline, with Newsline.
I think it was. I mean, we were able to push the boundaries. It was we had a lot of material because it was a very dramatic time politically. There was so many things that happened. We started in July by there were ethnic clashes in Sindh and Karachi. Then there was the vote of no confidence against Benazir Bhutto in November of that year. And there was constantly, there was a lot of political drama, a lot of political things happening. So we had a lot of material right there. There was a lot of tumult in Pakistan, a lot of tumult in Sindh. Our second issue was a beautiful cover. We had beautiful covers as well. Uh, Imran Mir's team, who had done the work for us at Herald, the creative unit, he had recommended someone, A.G. Khalid. So A.G. Khalid basically was our creative director, art director. And for example, our second, and the covers, a lot of the artwork was very good. The second cover, I think, should be a collector's item, really. It was, the story was Sindh, uh, a province held to ransom.
Hmm.
So it was kind of the political connotations, but also at that time there was a lot of kidnapping for ransom going on. So it was kind of, uh, uh, that sort of resonated in it, but also the political position of Sindh. So it was a really beautiful cover if you have a look at it sometime.
I
And
recall it because I've read every single issue of Newsline. Uh, I'm sure there are many Karachiites who can say the same. Uh,
mm,
and then I left Pakistan, but I used to get Newsline and the Herald regularly, and certainly both Newsline and the Herald informed my own writing. And I think Mass Transit came out of my first novel came out of that. I wasn't in your newsroom, but I was certainly being informed by it, by you, all of you, and the wonderful work that you were doing. And you mentioned, that Muhammad Hanif went on to be a senior journalist at BBC, and then he is, I agree with you, our finest novelist in both languages. He writes so beautifully. But you yourself are inspired to write a novel, are you not?
Well, yeah, it is being published this year.
Mhm.
And yeah, hopefully I will have it in digital form on Little Book Company. Let's see.
I would love that. Will you be able to tell us a little bit about it, Umber?
It's about a journalist
Oh, surprise, surprise.
in
Uh-huh.
the 90s, in the 90s.
Oh, really? In the 90s?
Yeah, who is quite naive.
Aha. There you go. Who is
Yeah,
quite. Mhm.
because I mean, this is my, as an aside, I just think still a lot of, and there was probably then, a lot of manipulation of stories and political agendas, kind of create a spin for
Mhm.
which way the story is told.
Mhm.
And it was happening then, and it's very obvious now in the news in Pakistan,
Mhm.
especially on TV channels, I would say.
Oh, well, yeah, it's a little bit hard to stomach if you can take it watching the television channels. I find it very difficult.
Yeah, but it's pretty obvious. I mean, you have control. I mean, do you wonder why every channel is showing the same items, the same press conferences?
Mhm. Mhm. And with no analytical power whatsoever.
Uh, so yeah, the way stories are spun and put in the kind of,
Mhm.
uh, public domain and things like this. So there's this whole kind of narrative, rumor mills, everything gets going and it all comes together. So anyway, that's the book is a little bit about that.
Mhm. 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 Well, I think it's going to be, and you're done with the novel. It's going to be published, so it's already in the can, and I have read a draft of it, so I know that it's a wonderful novel, and it's going to be a big success, Umber. So I'm going to congratulate you in advance.
Okay, that's kind. Let's see if whether what the readership is.
And as we wrap up, is there anything more that you want to say about Razia Bhatti? Because you've named a lot of people who were part of that team, and I'm going to reach out to as many of them as I can to continue this conversation that you have started. And but talk a little bit more about Razia Bhatti, and then I'll let you go.
So I would say that, I mean, I always consider myself incredibly fortunate to have worked with Razia, because I learned a lot from her. And I was, young when I joined. They were all quite experienced. I was young. It was my first job in journalism. I'd be doing freelance writing before that for the Herald also, and then for Star and for Dawn, and for these people. But it was my first, full-time job in journalism, and so I think I'm very privileged to have, had to have worked with an editor like that, and she was a real inspiration to all of the people who worked with her, and a very dignified woman, a real professional, and I would say just an inspiration.
Mhm.
And yeah, so, and also a real inspiration. And when you go to kind of now corporate kind of things, and you have people who like tell you about leadership and building teams and everything, she knew all that stuff.
Mhm. It came to her naturally.
Yeah, she was able to keep people together
Mhm.
in a harmonious unit
Mhm.
and make them feel like they were part of almost like a family.
Mhm.
And that's something not everybody can do.
And what do you think the secret sauce is to that?
I think it was her personality
Mm-hmm.
and her commitment to her work and to people. And yeah,
Was it?
and I mean, she was a wife and a mother,
Mhm.
and but she worked crazy hours. I mean, we used to do so many night shifts, working out all night, when we were close to deadlines and everything. And because Razia was so demanding as well, the hours were quite long. For example, that you're finishing a story
Mhm.
and you have to write the caption. And she was like, well, this caption is not good enough. Find something punchy. So you'd be another hour or two finding a punchy caption.
Mhm. So,
But,
the hour. Tell me, so you went in at what time?
sorry?
What time did she come in the morning?
So this whole, I used to try and start earlier, but most of the team from the Herald would start kind of late morning, after 11 and work till the evening.
Evening meaning?
It would depend. At the beginning of the month, it would mostly commissioning and planning, so you didn't have to do long hours.
Mhm.
Towards the end of the month, closer to your publication, you would have a lot of editing and a lot of production. So we would work long hours, often late nights.
Till
But
what?
that's we had material when all the material was coming in close to the date.
So you'd be there till 3 in the morning?
Yeah, could
And
be.
would you then at 3 in the morning just all go your separate directions or just stop in somewhere for a nashta?
No, nashta. I mean, we would eat while we were at the office.
Mhm.
Then at 3 in the morning, in sort of quite difficult, insecure kind of
Yes,
crime-ridden times, we just want to go home. And
yes.
of course, the news group, we had office transport.
Mhm.
Now we have our own transport and things like that.
Mhm.
So yeah, but what I'm saying is she was very hardworking, but she really uh, was really committed to the profession.
Mhm.
It wasn't just like, oh, well, I'll just do this job on the side. I mean, she was totally committed to this profession
Was
and
she
to the,
last to leave the office?
well, it would depend. I mean, there was no kind of one thing,
Mhm.
but yeah, of most times.
The last to leave, and in this case, she was the first one to go.
Yeah. As I said, it was a big shock. I mean, 1996, that's what, almost 30 years.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I'm really glad that the CEJ has worked with us on setting up this kind of memorial scheme.
Mhm.
We have the memorial lectures, and the lectures are not about Newsline. The lectures are about journalism and good best practice
Mhm.
experiences and talk about that.
Mhm.
But I mean, they're a tribute to Razia because of her commitment to the profession and her excellence in that field. So I'm glad they're there. Her gold medal is there for journalists. Yeah,
I think
whether
you.
it inspires the same kind of approach in young journalists, I'm not sure because I don't know if they're exposed to it enough.
uh, that the young journalists are exposed to what?
This kind of editorial excellence,
Mhm.
this kind of approach to news stories,
Mhm.
you know, this, for example, before we came up with Newsline, I mean, we spent hours, you know, planning the magazine. So you have to know what you stand for, how you look, how you sound, you know, where your positions are.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times, sort of young journalists will parrot things
Mhm.
and they'll make content without actually having a distinctive voice or a tone.
Mhm.
So, I mean, a lot don't. I mean, there's a lot of excellent content coming out as well. But yeah, so I think what would be wonderful would be to have some kind of archive not just of Newsline, but of Herald also,
Mhm.
because these two magazines, even when, after Newsline was created, I mean, yes, there was a rivalry, but also in tandem, they are great documents. They document a certain time and they have historical and sociological value. And what would be excellent would be to have them properly archived.
Are they not available online?
I think some parts, not the Herald has some sort of archive,
Mhm.
but I mean, the eventual demise of Herald must have been because of financial reasons and publishing climate, but also there was politics involved there as well.
Yes.
And, it was a brave and bold magazine. And there's the more recent copies, I think, are archived, but the older ones, I'm not sure if they are or not. The
Mhm.
ones from the 80s, 70s.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, that is a really very important historical reference, both of these
Mhm.
magazines.
When
So
you look at the Dawn now, with its various parts, don't you find the writing has improved tremendously? For some reason, I do. That they're coming out with, article after article that's quite impressive. If you look at their EOS section and their Prism section, um,
yes, yes, there is.
mhm,
Uh, I think the Weekend magazine has its own character,
mhm,
maybe.
mhm,
They have their own style and everything.
yes.
But I don't know if it's something that you actually wait for as much. And part of that is maybe because of, the digital world now. Everything comes to you much quicker. You
Much,
don't have to,
yeah.
oh, we used to wait for the beginning of the month for these magazines to come out, or for Friday, for the
Oh,
Friday Times to come out.
me about it. I used to wait for the Herald and try to ration the way I read it over the month. And then when I saw my hawker carrying, the new issue, oh, it just meant so much. But there wasn't too much competing for my time at that time. You know,
Mm.
there weren't TV channels. There was one PTV, and there was the Betamax where you might get a good movie for the weekend to see or not, some pirated film. But it was the Herald that saw me through my time in Karachi in the 80s.
It was a different time. It was a different era.
Mhm.
And yeah, all these uh, sort of, yeah, magazines and newspapers were. And I mean, the thing with Herald and Newsline was that you enjoyed all of it, because I think they were so well put together.
Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, but I mean, I think Razia is a great, uh, uh, an important figure in Pakistani journalism, in the journalism of the region as well. And I mean, she wasn't just like, I'm an editor. She had a vision. First, the vision was Newsline. And I mean, I think our initial thing was we would have a monthly, and if we could afford to, we'd go fortnightly. Of course, that was never viable for us, but it would have been very exciting because there was so much happening politically and there was so much news. And, if we'd had the funding, I think it would have been amazing. But, but she had these ideas. There were projects. We started a children's magazine called Funline, and that was in conjunction with the Teachers Resource Center.
Mhm.
Then there were partnerships with various environmental, I think there was some, there were various ones. So it was across, she could create these partnerships, she could visualize, let's do this, she could think big as well.
She,
So, I mean, it is amazing that actually Newsline was able to survive for decades,
mhm.
because working against all odds, again, under many pressures, after Razia passed away, Rehana took over as editor, and it was extremely, extremely difficult. It was very pressurized, and amazing that we were able to have the magazine for that many years.
When did Newsline finally wrap up?
That was a few years ago. Basically, we were in very bad shape financially, so we were looking for somebody to invest. And at that time, we spoke to the Hum Group, and they basically bought it out with a lot of promises of keeping staff and taking it places and doing things. But then after a while, they just said, "Okay, no, we can't go on with this."
So they own the archive?
I don't know. I wasn't there, so I don't know what the terms are.
Well, Umber, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, and so, spontaneously and impromptu about Razia Bhatti. And I'm going to try to do a few more conversations with some of the people you've talked about, and get their points of views on Razia Bhatti and on Newsline, and I hope that this contributes to your aim of keeping her memory alive and an inspiration.
Thank you so much, Maniza. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, and as I say, she is a very important figure in journalism.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maniza.
We decided to do a little bit more because you wanted to make a correction.
Yes, I was just recalling that Razia had passed away. It was March 1996.
Mm-hmm.
I said February 1996 because I remember my daughter was born in February, and just a few weeks before she passed away, Razia had made a point of coming to see me, and she brought a present, which the whole, for the baby, which she'd got the whole team to pull together, and it was from the team.
Mm.
So that was the last time I saw her. And because, anyway, so that was March 1996 that she passed away.
Mm. Well, I would have asked you to tell me more about, the celebration she had for the baby, and but do you want to speak about that a little bit more before we?
It wasn't I mean, she made a point of coming to see me and bringing the present and a card, but she looked very tired and very stressed. And this is, when I'd mentioned that she was very good at managing the team, making people feel like part of a family and everything. So I think for her, it was very important to do that. She was very particular about things like that.
And maybe, I think the slip of the tongue, you shouldn't, neither you nor I should worry about that. It's very late at night for you now, and you agreed to do this podcast, I think way past midnight for you. So Umber, thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maniza.
Okay, all right. Khuda Hafiz.